This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Hello and welcome to The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand. I'm Joe Hildebrand and this is The Real Story. We've got another crackerjack episode for you this week. A bit of a bumper one. I'm going to explain to you why trans rights and the war in Gaza and Peter Dutton are all in fact three different units, a holy trinity if you will, of the same mystical political entity. Yes, it's all interconnected and I'm going to explain how very, very shortly. Plus we'll be talking about the housing crisis. We've got a great question from one of our listeners on why on earth we've still got negative gearing on investment properties at a time when we don't have enough houses to go around. And perhaps the most exciting thing of all, we have the man of the moment, Gold Logie winner Larry Emdur joins us right here in the studio to talk about what really goes on behind the scenes of a Logie campaign. All that and much, much more coming up. First up this week, I want to talk about the omnicause. Now, this is a phrase that's been coined to describe what progressives try to sew together as a sort of coherent, progressive, left-wing agenda, when in fact all its different parts are often contradictory, run counter to the interests of the other. A perfect example is, for example, Queers for Palestine, right? Obviously, if you're queer in Palestine itself, you're not going to last very long. And obviously, those two causes go in completely different directions. But because the left is very much in favour of queer rights and the left is very much in favour of Palestine, they have to sort of pretend that it's all one and the same thing. Now, this is the sort of stuff we've all gone through, or some of us have anyway. I'm really sorry about that. In our university years, I was a student socialist, didn't know any better, grew up, got a job, figured out how the world works, and let's just never talk about that again. But it also has real-world consequences for the government, and especially for the Labor government, and I'll explain that very shortly. In fact, it's led to the snafu that the Labor government now finds itself in. But first, let's go back to that sort of crazy undergraduate pipe dream, those golden years of university and campus life that some of us would prefer to forget and others literally just can't remember. And this played out in a beautiful little scenario in Victoria over the weekend. Melbourne, the steps of Parliament House, and there was a protest by a group calling itself the Women's Action Group. Remember that time when it was the left who were all into women's rights and everything? Well, all that's changed. Suddenly the right is all in on women's rights. Suddenly all conservatives are feminists because they think women's rights run counter to trans rights. And again, I'm not going to get into that whole debate, whatever. You can have your own view on it. I think it's actually something that affects very few people, that's been used as a machine gun, used as a political weapon to try and start a culture war that really doesn't need to be started. But that's just me. Never mind. So there's a group called a Women's Action Group, and they have a little protest, a little demonstration on the steps of Parliament House to say how, women need safe spaces and trans women shouldn't be allowed in them, yada, yada, yada. So, they get up, they talk. And of course, you can't have a protest these days without having a counter-protest. And so this Women's Action Group event gets targeted by a group calling themselves Trans Queer Solidarity. So they're out there and they do their little counter-protest. It gets a bit nasty. They're throwing water balloons. They're throwing eggs. I believe, what is it with the left and eggs? Just love eggs. A good source of protein, but come on. It's food waste. Anyway, someone got arrested, a woman from Brunswick. They also carried the placard, and this I found intriguing, fascist graves are gender-neutral toilets. I majored in English at university, and I still don't know what that means. Now, why is this important? What does this have to do with the price of fish? My life, I'm just trying to pay the mortgage, pay the rent. What has it even got to do with mainstream politics? Peter Dutton or Anthony Albanese, the Labor government, Liberal opposition. We've got an election coming up in a few months. Here's just a few crazy radicals on the fringes, yelling at each other, screaming at each other, throwing eggs at each other. What is the point? Well, the problem is that when you have these forces on the left who are trying to drag the government to a position or just making lots of noise and, again, starting these culture wars that can then be weaponised, it ends up sort of reflecting back on the major political parties and sort of acting like a ball and chain around their feet, dragging them to a place they don't want to be. Because another thing that was at this rally, and this is what really surprised me, even more than the fact that fascist graves are gender-neutral toilets, a fact I did not know, was that someone had just rocked up at this trans rights rally, which was a counter protest to the anti-trans rights rally, and someone's just rocked up carrying a Palestinian flag and starts waving it around. What the fuck does Palestine have to do with any of this? Nothing. But of course, if you're on the left, everything's got to do with Palestine. It's all part of the omni-cause. Now, again, I'm not going to get into the conflict with Gaza, but the thing is that they try to make everything about these sort of hot button issues, even when the number one issue for everybody has nothing to do with these things. A survey in New South Wales by the Office of Children and Young People found even among young people, these types of people, like the most radical people, we're all the most radical in our youth. Winston Churchill famously is supposed to have said, although he didn't quite say it, that if you're not a socialist at 18, you have no heart, and if you're still a socialist at 50, you have no head. Point being, even among young people, typically the most politically radical, cost of living is the number one most important issue they named. They did a huge survey, kids and young adults aged 10 to 24, and they found that cost of living was such a massive issue, they didn't have to be asked about it. They actually volunteered. Before anyone said, A, B, C, or D, they said cost of living. 35% of them named this unprovoked just came straight out of the blocks and said, this is what we're most worried about. You want to compare that. That was the end of last year. 2 years earlier, that was just 8%. So it has gone from 8% of people mentioning it, young people, 10-year-olds to 24-year-olds, talking about cost of living, economic issues, right? Unheard of. These are usually people who are most preoccupied with ideological issues or anxiety about climate change, that sort of stuff. Anyway, cost of living more than quadrupled from 8% to 35% of young people mentioning it completely straight off the bat in just 2 years. Phenomenal stuff. So again, cost of living is all people care about, but no one's throwing eggs over it. No one's having rallies and counter rallies over cost of living. They're just quietly fretting about it. But the extremes on either side are trying to force the major parties to talk about these other issues. Now, this brings us to what's happened in the last week in and around Parliament, where Peter Dutton has decided, right, I've got a hot one here. I'm going to use the fact that the government has stuffed up immigration detention. There was a High Court judgment, of course, where detainees had to be released even though they'd been charged or convicted of terrible criminal acts, and some of them reoffended in the community. So the government's no good at keeping Australians safe from immigrants is basically the line. And, in this case, it's completely correct. They completely stuffed it up. But then he sort of puts that on top of the potential threat from refugees from Gaza and the couple of thousand of humanitarian or tourist visas given for humanitarian reasons to people in Gaza by the Australian government. Now, there's been concerns raised over whether or not enough security checks have been done. Fine, that's a valid concern, absolutely. But Dutton then goes one step further and says, no, we should just ban them all. No more refugees from Gaza. No more. And then when he starts to cop a bit of heat from that, he says, no, I meant no more refugees from Gaza without the appropriate security checks, proper security checks. Now, there are pretty good reasons why you probably can't do appropriate security checks if you're trying to get someone out of a live war zone with bombs raining down on top of them, because none of the other Arab countries around Israel are actually letting them come out, to their absolute shame. So it's not like they can sit in a UN refugee camp, as they did in previous conflicts with Syria, for example, and just sit there and wait for a vetting process that could take months to accomplish. So again, if you want to save these people's lives, you've got to get them out of there pretty quickly. And perhaps not all security vetting procedures were as thorough as they should have been. In fact, there's been about 20, I believe, who have since had their visas revoked, and 40 who have had their visas actually revised or cancelled. So point being, Dutton knows that he's onto a winner here. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said it. He's obviously thought, you know what, I reckon most Australians quietly agree with me. And he's come out and said this, and then almost right on cue, you could set your watch to it, Zali Steggall, the Teal MP for Warringah, comes out and says this.
Yes or no, do you think Peter Dutton's a racist?
I think he's condoning racist policy.
So do you think he's a racist?
By association, yes.
By calling him racist, you're risking legal action right at the moment.
Well, again, I think there would be a defence of truth when I look at the definition of racism when I come to that policy.
Now, again, Dutton can say whatever he wants. He's a good political messenger. He's a good political operator. He's smart, despite what a lot of people think. And not everyone hates him as much as the left seems to think they do. And I know him. He's a nice guy. He's a perfectly nice guy. Don't agree with him on a lot of stuff, but he's a lovely guy. But the left thinks he's this big boogeyman, and if they can make everything about Dutton is evil, Dutton's a racist, Dutton's horrible, then they'll just cruise home to victory. Now, in teal seats, I'm sure most people do think that. In the rest of the world, there's quite a lot to suggest that people actually quietly agree with Peter Dutton. I don't. There are plenty of people who would say, well, no, why are we taking these people if we don't know if they're terrorists or not, or terrorist sympathisers or not, or Hamas supporters or not? Now, again, I do not think that, but there are plenty of people who would, and they are perfectly entitled to think that. And now, of course, that's all we're talking about. And we're talking about whether or not Peter Dutton's a racist. And, of course, Labor is too sensible to call him a racist. They're not that stupid. But instead of talking about actual issues they want to talk about, like all the great stuff they're doing with cost of living, the $300 they're giving you on your electricity bill, or the tax cuts that kicked in on July 1, or the free childcare, they're talking about whether or not Peter Dutton is a racist. And why are we talking about whether or not Peter Dutton is a racist? Because of his plan to stop people coming in from Gaza. So we're talking about border security. We're talking about the one issue on which Labor is consistently the weakest, and the one issue which constantly comes up from nowhere. When things are fine, things are good, the boats have stopped, no one's thinking about border security. But as soon as things are not fine, there's economic pressures, people start to think about migration. As soon as there's a war going on and conflict within the community, people start to think about security and who we're letting into the country and whether they are safe or not. And that never plays well for Labor. Labor's always been seen as, and often has been, a party that embraces migration and migrants, and rightly so, and is a supporter of multiculturalism. And when everything's going great, that's fine. But when things are not going so great, and then probably not going so great, that's not right now, I would hazard to guess, then this is a terrible Achilles heel for Labor. And Dutton knows it. So again, he is just throwing something out there, a pretty outlandish, full-on, hardline, maybe even extreme statement saying, no one else from Gaza, that's it. Knowing that will get everyone talking, even his enemies attacking him for it. And Dutton apparently says he's seeking legal advice over whether it's defamatory or not to call him a racist. But whatever, that just keeps the story going. Point being, this is what we're all talking about. We're all talking about, including myself, quite frankly, all talking about the one area where Labor doesn't want us to be talking about. And Labor is falling into the trap as well by attacking Peter Dutton for what he's said. And if this sounds familiar, it should, because it's exactly what he did with nuclear power. He talks about this plan, pie in the sky. It's never going to happen to have 7 nuclear power plants. It's too expensive. It's too long term. You know, there'll be NIMBYs saying, I don't want it anywhere near me. And again, it's never going to happen. And Dutton must know that. The Libs must know that. But they put it out there because why? Because it gets everyone talking about power and power security and power affordability, how much your electricity bill is costing. We're talking about things that are a weak point for Labor. And again, with border security, we are talking about things that are a weak point for Labor. And Labor and the left more generally seem to keep falling for it. And this is not, to quote Gene Hackman from the Royal Tenenbaums, just one man's opinion. If you want proof that this is all Peter Dutton and the coalition want Labor to be talking about and the rest of us to be thinking about, all you have to look at is Parliament on Tuesday. And I'll quote a line from the Australian's coverage. The subject of every single question asked of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese by the coalition during question time, every single question, not most, every single one, has focused on the number of visas granted to arrivals from Gaza since October the 7th that have been later cancelled. This is all he wants the government to talk about because he knows it's bad for them every time they do, because it raises actual concerns in the community's mind about whether this is actually safe. And is it about whether the community is actually safe? Is it about whether or not we should be letting more refugees from Gaza into Australia? Well, I don't think so, somehow. Why is that? Because we can't. The borders are shut. There's no way of getting any more of them out. The borders have been shut for 3 months. They shut in May. No one can get any Palestinians out of Gaza, even if we wanted to. So the ban's there. It's been there for 3 months before Peter Dutton even called for it. And that's the real story. Well, our guest this week is probably the specialist of special guests that we've had. I've loved them all, but we've just ratcheted it up a notch. He is the man of the moment. He is the man with the golden gun, and that gun is in the shape of a Logie. Yes, he won gold on Sunday night, shocked everybody, including himself, but not me, because I always knew it was going to happen. Larry Emdur. Now, congratulations. I'm so wrapped. I'm on the record as being all in on Emdur for gold. I'm pretty sure it was this podcast endorsement that got you over the line. I think
that's
so.
my understanding.
I think so.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, you were tracking okay, but you just need that little push. Talk us through. I want to get sort of right into the guts of how do you, because you were genuinely surprised that you won, weren't you?
I gave myself zero chance of that. And I've resigned myself to the fact that it's just not happening. So I just kind of didn't care, and I was just waiting for it to finish so I could kind of go home. So I was not in the game. I was not in the space at all. In my head, I'd convinced myself that it was going to be either Robert Irwin with his massive following, social media following,
6 million followers on
and love him,
Instagram.
and he's fantastic,
Yep.
or it was going to be a primetime superstar, and that's not what I am, like the morning show. It's not
Trust me,
prime
mate,
time.
I know. Mornings are where it's at in television.
Yeah,
Mornings is
right.
the real.
You get it, but I mean, it's a great show. I love it, and we've been going for a long time. But it's not your big primetime audience, and the Chase is sort of late afternoon. So you're talking,
It's prime time adjacent.
That's right. It's off Broadway, and they're great shows, and they're both very successful. Touch wood, but they're not the big primetime machines. And that's in my head. I'd go there, have a nice free meal, I got a new suit, and go home.
Now, anyone else, I would say that's bullshit and it's just faux modesty. But obviously, we know each other. We've been mates for many, many years, and I know you, and you are generally the nicest, humblest guy in television. So I actually believe you. So
thank you. I'm glad.
Which, if you are actually trying to bullshit me, well done.
I'm
because
good at
that's a masterstroke. But whether you think you're going to win or not, whether you are really into it or not, or it's something you really want, it doesn't matter. Seven wants you to win it. The publicity machine wants you to win it.
Right.
How does a Logie's campaign start? Once they realise, okay, you got the nomination, it's all systems go. The machine starts to.
And
turn.
I was
How does it
a
work?
hostage in that, and you know me well enough to know that's the truth.
Yes.
That I was incredibly grateful. I was thrilled to be nominated. It meant a lot to me. I was flattered, but I said to them as soon as they told me, my first concern was, I said the first words out of my mouth, I can't do that thing where I stand on a street corner and go, vote for me.
Yeah.
Or I can't.
Yeah. It's unbecoming.
It's just not.
That's right.
I just couldn't do it, and that was actually the first words out of my mouth. So, and I thought, probably in retrospect, that sounded ungrateful for the machine that was about to turn on behind me. But I was just like, I can't do
Yeah,
that.
that's right. You can't hang out your shingle. You're not
No.
You can't be a spruiker. You don't want to be like that guy who stands outside the fruit and vegetable shop saying, "Look at these lovely peaches, $3 a kilo, very fresh this day."
Although I'd be very good at that. But I said that early. They got it, and I said I don't want to break from the guy that people may like. I don't want to become that spruiker guy. So I'll campaign on my social media, but I'll do it my way. So that involves taking the piss, having fun, knocking myself down, and I think that was okay.
And that was when I knew that it was working, because it was so kind of genuine. You were taking the piss, but not in a sort of sabotage way, not in like, oh, who wants to believe Logie?
No.
It was like a really kind of, and it was so funny. You are actually, people don't realize you're actually one of the funniest blokes on television. You taught me everything I know, which largely involves, like pretending to read a book upside down, or
You're right.
Dressing up as Michael Bolton. But, those are the classics.
Not since Ernie and Denise have people seen comedy like that.
That's right. We should do Hey Paula.
Let's.
That it was very, very funny. It was very, very warm, and it was very kind of, I don't know, it was kind of like accessible. It was just like it was just you doing your thing. It was very,
Well, I'm glad you spotted that. I know you've got a cynical eye across the media, and I'm glad you could see through that and just see that I was just trying to keep it honest, and I didn't want to I didn't want to change into a different Larry Emdur, a hard sell Larry Emdur. I think that would have repelled people, and I'm glad that people could just come along and go, I was just having fun with this.
And then the masterstroke is that you come out the week of the Logies with just days to go and say, I am so convinced I will not win that I will get the tattoos, I will get the initials of the other nominees tattooed on my ass if I do win. Now, again, people said, look at Larry, so humble, honestly, just, he's promising that now. Oh my God, now he actually has to do it. How crazy. I am absolutely convinced that you knew, you are humble, but you're not stupid, you're smart. And I reckon you knew that, as they say in US politics, that was a guaranteed get out the vote pool, that you knew that people would come out and they would vote for you just to see that happen. Well, tell me I'm wrong.
No. I thought that would create a stir, clearly, but I didn't think it would win. I thought it would create a lot of fun for the morning show. And then I thought maybe I should ring John Singleton and go, mate, do you think that's a good idea? It's a good scam. It's like sex. The people want to see my ass now. So
it's good too, I can tell you.
I didn't think it was a winner. I knew it would create some noise, and that was the fun thing. And it did. It did.
I reckon you had it in the bag before that, but I reckon that is what absolutely sealed the deal. And you can. So
I've sacrificed my.
Was it the left or the right?
Well, it depends which way you're looking at it. It was my right, but your stage left.
Yeah.
It depends which way. I guess it depends which way you're coming at it from.
Yeah. Well, there's only the right way.
Depends when I'm in prison. I guess I don't know.
That's right. And talk us through the day itself, because I actually said to one of your colleagues on the Sunday, I said, one of the few benefits of being fired from television is that you don't have to go to the Logies anymore.
It's long, man.
Because it is long. I'm not saying the Logies are bad. They're great, fun to watch and everything. But it is, the day doesn't start at 7:30 p.m.
No.
So talk us through what goes on backstage on the actual day.
Well, the actual day. So we start with a little cocktail party at Channel 7, sort of cocktail party, and photos at about, I think it was about 2:30, maybe 3 o'clock.
Oh my God, that's a later. But
Sylvie. So all the girls are in makeup at 10 and 11 o'clock in the morning. So Sylvie, a reluctant participant in all of this because she hates that.
I know. Think of the wives and families.
Yeah,
honestly,
Pray for the wives in their lovely dresses
behind.
with jewellery.
Or not left. Pray for those who haven't been left behind. Pray for those who are forced to.
But Sylvie, for so many years, she came to a couple many years ago. She goes, just go without me. Go and talk to your TV friends about TV, and I'll be fine. So. But because of the gold nomination, she gets to come, and I'm so glad she was there. But she was very uncomfortable along the red carpet being interviewed, and she wasn't. That wasn't her happy place. So I was, we were anxious for her, and but she did a beautiful job. She looked amazing, and all the interviews she did,
I've got to say, you've married well.
Right?
You've married well, long and well. So she gets in at about 10:30 in the morning.
And they start with the hair.
She's already looking at a 12-hour day.
Right. Plus.
And then you and the boy, it's so good, isn't it, being a bloke in television? Because you just rock up, 4 hours later?
Yeah. Well, while she was doing that, I went for a walk in the pouring rain around here for 2 hours. It was it's actually exactly what I needed. Yeah. And then because of my magnificent haircut, I don't spend any time in hair and makeup at all. So I just slipped on a... In fact, the publicist was in the room with us, just walking us through what interviews and stuff we had to do. And I think we had to be downstairs at, say, 2:45, and it was 20 to 3. And she said, are you going to get changed? And I was just like, oh, okay, I'll put my suit on. Yeah. So we're lucky, right?
Yeah, we're so lucky. Yeah. Just born perfect, I guess.
Yeah.
So you go to the cocktail party, and again, I've been to these cocktail parties, and you think, finally, we're out of hair and makeup, got the monkey suit on, finally can relax and have a drink. And then before you can even get your hands on one, they say, right, you've got to go and do the red carpet.
Off you go, red carpet. And red carpet... is when you're a gold nominee, Joe. I don't know if you know this.
Well, I don't know this, obviously.
You have to stop. I'm sorry, was that triggering?
Well, I'm not a gold nominee.
You have to stop.
I did steal someone's silver at one of the
haven't we all?
They made me give it back.
Haven't we all? When you go on the red carpet, because last year when I wasn't nominated for anything, you just sort of cruise down and you get stopped by Channel 7 and a couple of the radio stations, and that's it. But when you're a gold nominee, as it turns out, you got to stop at every interview spot. So that took an hour and a half or more down the track. So, talking. But it's fun. It was exciting. I don't want to write it off.
I'm just going to very quickly compare and contrast your experience with my usual experience at the Logies, which is when you do the whole red carpet, in which everyone wants to talk to Sarah and Jessica Rowe and Ida Buttrose, and I stand there and hold their purses. And then you get to the photo wall where you've got all the photographers who and of course I always, being that, I know my face is what the housewives of Australia are crying out for, but I'm a humble guy like you. So they, again, Sarah and Jess and Ida and Denise Drysdale, all the big glamour zons, the big names in TV, and they all get marched in front of the photo wall. Other people, lesser mortals, are allowed to sort of run around.
Yes.
But of course, the publicist says, no, up you go. And so Ida comes out, and it is like a rainstorm. It's like a lightning storm. It's like flash, flash, flash.
Yes.
And Ida comes out, and it's flash, flash, flash. Jess comes out, flash, flash, flash. Sarah comes out, flash, flash, flash. Denise, and the whole thing. And I come out, and there's just this incredible silence. I've never felt so tranquil and
Not
still.
one click.
It's just like occasionally it'll be like one of the shooters from the telly or something, because I know a lot.
Oh,
of the
a
camera
sympathy
guys, they go,
click.
oh, g'day, Joe. No, they don't even give me a sympathy click. He's like, g'day, Joe. G'day, Roscoe.
Keep moving.
Yep,
Keep moving. Here come the home and away kids. Keep moving.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's why you, on the other hand, you're the man du jour, the man of the moment. So an hour and a half talking to every single person on the red carpet.
Yeah.
And it's always, I know, like it's always like The Voice or something will have like Seal or someone, and there'll be like, an army. It's as though they kind of travel in a little sort of pack, but just like an army of 13-year-old girls just screaming.
Yes.
Did you get that?
Didn't get that. I got an army of great-great-grandmothers.
Yep.
Holding their teeth in, yelling out.
That's right. Yeah, I get Doreen at Coles Ashfield.
Yeah, that's
so.
right. But
you
know what?
Thing, why can't my daughter buy a house anymore?
But you know what? They voted.
Yes, they did.
They all voted, and I love them all.
I've got to feel. I know you talked about the sheer number of the sheer volume of sort of social media followers that Robert Irwin has, but I've got a feeling with daytime television, and I think this is why you see so many more scandals and outrages and Twitter storms and stuff with daytime television, because it's much more intimate than prime time.
It's very intimate.
I think when you sit down and watch a prime time show, you think, right, I'm sitting down and I'm watching, well, literally watching a show, but I'm watching someone perform something. Whereas when people sit down to watch you, or in the old days, Studio 10, or any number of other shows, even to a lesser extent, I think, Sunrise and the Brekkie shows, because then you're busy, you're getting ready to go somewhere.
Very different.
But if you're sitting at home, you're all in the same room together, you're in your house, they're kind of part of your routine, they're almost part of your family. And I reckon you would have, it might not be in terms of just sheer massive viewers the same as prime time, but in the intensity and the quality and the connection, I reckon it's much
very
stronger.
different relationships and intimate relationships. You're right. We're in the lounge room, and if people are watching at home at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning, there's a chance they're in their pajamas or their undies or breastfeeding babies, or we're part of that process. Sunrise and the Today Show are different. It's transient. You'll get up, you'll have the TV on in the background where you're getting ready for work, and it is a very different relationship, as is the afternoon game shows, because you're either home because you're home, or you've just come in from work, you're getting ready for dinner. We're in the house, and we're part of the family and part of the real estate. And that's different. As you're exactly right, Joe, for those big primetime shows, the relationships are very different.
There's a ridiculous word that has become really, really it's the super buzzword of the moment among sort of historians who podcast, basically, which is in itself a phenomenon. And they say it's liminal. It's a liminal place. It's a between place in the sun. The breakfast slot and that kind of 5 p.m. slot is a in between place. But the mornings, you're there, baby. You're right there.
If you're there, you're there.
You're in the lounge room. You're on the couch.
Yeah, you're on the couch. You're in your undies. Or maybe you're not. Maybe you're just in bed.
That's right. Why
watching the telly?
Why wear undies?
That's right. Maybe it's winter. Maybe your bum's cold. Maybe you've just had a tattoo on your bum and you've got to wear undies.
How is it healing up, by the way?
Yeah, fine, thanks. I'm uncomfortable talking to you about my bum, but okay, fine. You want to go there?
I feel for me it's worth it for the content. Speaking of which, I know, and again, we've been out to many fantastic lunches together. You always insisted on paying because that's just the kind of humble, generous guy you are. I know up until now, you probably thought, it's just a bloody freeloader, can't get a job, I better. But now you realise, I imagine, that what you were buying with those lunches was access. You were buying.
That's right.
You were buying influence. You bought your way onto the Real Story podcast, and that's how shit gets done in this town, isn't it? Well, Larry Emdur, you are no longer Gold Logie adjacent. You have got it in your hot little hand. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I know it has been a career highlight for you as well. Thank you so much for coming on the Real Story.
It really has, mate. Thank you very much. And, of course, your shout for lunch now.
I might just go get my wallet. And this week's question comes from Rebecca, who hit me up on the DMs, on the IG, I'm 48 years old. This is unbecoming. Anyway, Rebecca says, "Hi, Joe. This is something that's really annoyed me with many governments for a while. They all pretend to care about housing and its availability or affordability, but they won't get rid of negative gearing or even scale it down to only one house or something like that. It's a no-brainer. They're all so selfish and would rather kick the can down the road by letting people dig into their super of all the stupid ideas. Sorry for the rant, but I hate it. Love your show as usual." Oh, thanks, Rebecca. Rebecca, it's an absolute $1 million question. In fact, with house prices where they are, it's probably more than $1 million question. So Bill Shorten took precisely that policy to the one you mentioned, to the 2019 election, and it was meant to be an unlosable election for Labor, and they lost it. And this has spooked Labor something chronic. It has scared the bejesus out of them, and they are not going to touch negative gearing with a barge pole for a very long time for precisely that reason. And if you were designing a housing system or a taxation system, you would not have negative gearing anywhere near it. It's insane. The difference is that the housing crisis we've got now is not just a home ownership crisis, which was what most people were concerned about just a few years ago, but a rental crisis. So we have got a problem where it is even more immediate and acute, where people can't even rent, people who aren't even thinking about saving up enough money to afford a deposit to even try to buy a house. People cannot even find places to rent. And if you want a place to rent, you need lots of investment properties. You need lots of properties owned by someone else that they want to rent out to other people. So you actually want to make it more attractive for people to have investment properties so that they can then rent them out. So it's an extremely good question. And sadly, the nature of the housing crisis has changed, has actually gotten worse to the point where we need as many rental properties as we can. And then we can think about what we do to make houses more affordable once more people are able to afford even just a roof over their heads. And that's all we have time for today. Thanks so much for listening to The Real Story. I've had a great time. I know you have too. Even if you say otherwise, I know you don't mean it. If you love what you hear, leave a rating and review. If you like what you hear, leave a rating and review. If you don't like what you hear, leave a rating and review. Just don't review it the way you actually feel. Do the opposite. So just 5 stars, okay? Just 5. Is it 5? Is it out of 5? Whatever it is. The maximum number of stars, just hit that, okay? Can't be clearer. If you want us to cover anything on the pod, if you've got any questions you want answered, just reach out via our socials or via our email, therealstory@novapodcast.com.au. You can slide into my DMs on the gram, just like Rebecca did. My handle is @Joe_Hildebrand. And of course, you can read me every Monday or Saturday in the Daily Telegraph or whatever esteemed News Corp masthead happens to grace your fair city. See you next week.